Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wondered if people who call themselves moderate are actually as balanced in their views as they claim? Stick around because a fascinating new study is giving us a clue. Today we're diving into some really interesting research about what is happening with people who identify as being in the middle of the political road, specifically those who call themselves moderate Democrats or Republicans. You know, the folks who say they aren't strong partisans. The researchers looked at data over many years to see if these self-described moderates are really holding moderate views, or if something else is going on. They noticed that while many people identify as strong Democrats or Republicans, the majority of Americans identify as lean or weak partisans. They wanted to know if these moderate partisans are actually leaning towards extreme opinions on important issues. So, the big questions this research asks are pretty straightforward but have huge implications. First, are these moderate partisans over time more drawn to extreme positions on key policy issues like social benefits, healthcare, and race? Second, how have their views changed across the decades? And third, and this is the really forward-looking part, does holding these extreme views as a moderate partisan predict whether they'll become a stronger partisan later on? Understanding this, the researchers say, is super important for figuring out how political polarization is really deepening in our country. If moderates are quietly adopting extreme views, they might just be the strong partisans of tomorrow. To get to the bottom of this, the scientists used a really valuable data set called the American National Election Studies, or ANES. Think of it as a giant, long-running survey of Americans' political opinions. Going all the way back to 1972, they focused on a bunch of specific policy questions that were asked repeatedly over the years, using a 7-point scale. This scale is key because it lets people show how strongly they feel about something from one extreme to the other. For example, on health insurance, one end might be government insurance plan, and the other private insurance plan. The middle points are more moderate. Now, here is where it gets interesting. They looked at people who identified as lean or weak partisans. These are folks who might rate themselves as a 2, 3, 5, or 6 on a scale from 1 strong Democrat to 7 strong Republican. They wanted to see if these people, who aren't at the absolute ends of the party spectrum in terms of identity, were actually choosing the absolute ends of the policy scales. And what they found, especially by around 2020 and 2024, is striking. This means that people who describe themselves as only weakly or leaning Republican or Democrat are actually more likely to pick the most extreme answer on these policy questions than a middle-of-the-road answer. They came up with a term for this: belief acrophilia. It basically means an attraction to extreme beliefs. It's like saying, I am a moderate sports fan, but then only ever talking about or watching the absolute championship games and disliking anything less. Now, you might think, okay, but maybe this is just because newer generations are more extreme. The researchers thought of that too. They used special panel data where they tracked the same people over time. This is super important because it means they could see if an individual's views actually changed. And what did they find with the same people? Their extreme views as moderate partisans actually increased over the years they were tracked. So it is not just new people joining the surveys, it is actually individuals shifting their views. This is a really key finding. The really mind-blowing part, though, is the connection to future partisanship. They found that if you identified as a weak or lean partisan in 2016, but your views on these policy issues were already extreme, you were significantly more likely to become a strong partisan by 2020. Think about that. Having extreme views, even if you don't identify as an extreme partisan, makes you much more likely to strengthen your partisan identity down the road. It's like your beliefs are pulling your identity along with them. The research also showed that your views on these issues in 2016 were actually a better predictor of your party identification in 2020 than your party identification in 2016 was of your views in 2020. This suggests that for many, what they believe on issues is shaping who they become politically. So, what does this all mean? The researchers suggest that political polarization isn't just about Democrats and Republicans moving further apart on the policy issues themselves, that is, issue polarization. It is also not just about people's views aligning more consistently with their party, that is, ideological sorting. Belief acrophilia is something new and concerning because it shows that even people in the middle are getting pulled towards the extremes in their thinking. This underlying attraction to extreme views, even among self-described moderates, is what might be driving people to become stronger partisans. Why might this be happening? The study suggests a few possibilities. One is that people might be misperceiving what the norm is within their political group. Maybe they think extreme views are more common or more accepted than they actually are, influenced by media or social circles. Another idea is outgroup animosity, a growing dislike and distrust of people from the other party. The research found that people who felt more negatively about the other party were indeed more likely to adopt extreme views. And then there is the role of social media. We know that extreme content often gets more attention, which can amplify these extreme views and pull people in, even if they started out in the middle. This research highlights a really critical dynamic that we need to pay attention to. It is not just about the loudest voices. It is about how those voices might be subtly shifting the thinking of people who consider themselves moderate. The implication is that if we want to counter polarization, we need to look beyond just the overt partisan divide and focus on how extreme viewpoints are taking root, even among those who don't identify as extreme. Now, it is important to note a couple of things about this study. While it uses great data, the specific policy questions surveyed sometimes only had labels at the very ends of the scale, which could theoretically nudge people towards those extremes. However, the researchers did check other questions where this wasn't the case, and the effects still seem to be there, suggesting it is not just about the survey design. Also, this study is focused on American politics. My take on this, it is a really important piece of work that goes beyond the usual discussions about polarization. By focusing on moderate partisans and their issue stances, it uncovers a potentially crucial pathway to increase partisanship. It makes you wonder about the role of social media algorithms and the information diets we're all consuming. If we're constantly being exposed to and perhaps even seeking out extreme viewpoints, it is natural that our own beliefs might shift, even if our self-identity as a moderate hasn't caught up yet. So what here is pretty significant. If belief acrophilia is indeed a precursor to stronger partisanship, then understanding and potentially mitigating it could be a key strategy for fostering more moderate political discourse and strengthening democratic compromise. Imagine if we could find ways to highlight moderate voices more effectively or create spaces where nuanced perspectives are equally valued. Future research could dig deeper into the psychological drivers, like the exact mechanisms of social influence on these platforms, and explore interventions to encourage more moderate issue stances among those who identify as moderate partisans. What are your thoughts on this research? Do you see this belief acrophilia in your own life or in the political discussions you witness? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown helpful, please give us a like. Subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science explained simply, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.